The wagon wheel cracked with a sound like a gunshot, and Catherine Morgan felt her stomach drop as the entire right side of her wagon lurched downward into the dust of the Arizona Territory Road. She pulled hard on the reins, bringing her two horses to a halt as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the barren landscape, stretching endlessly in all directions. It was late August of 1879, and she had been traveling alone for 3 days now, trying to reach her sister's homestead outside Chloride before her supplies ran out. Catherine climbed down from the driver's seat, her boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a soft thud. The damage was immediately apparent. The wooden wheel had splintered in 2 places, and the iron rim had bent at an angle that made it impossible to roll. She stood there for a moment, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, staring at the broken wheel as if sheer willpower might repair it. She was 22 years old, had lost her husband to fever just 6 months prior, and was trying to make a new start with her younger sister, who had married a rancher out west. Now she was stranded on a desolate road with no tools adequate for the repair, and no idea when another traveler might pass by. She walked around the wagon, assessing what she had to work with. There were cooking supplies, blankets, her few precious belongings, but nothing that would fix a broken wheel. Catherine had watched her father repair wagons back in Missouri, had even helped him a time or two, but without proper tools and replacement wood, she was helpless. The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, and the thought of spending a night alone out here made her chest tighten with anxiety. Still, she was not one to give up without trying. Catherine began unloading some of the heavier items from the wagon, thinking that perhaps if she could lighten the load, she might be able to jury-rig something that would at least get her to the next town. She had just pulled down a crate of preserved goods when she heard the sound of hooves approaching from the north. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle she kept near the driver's seat, but she relaxed slightly when she saw it was a single rider leading a pack horse. As the figure drew closer through the shimmering heat, she could make out more details. He was a large man, powerfully built, sitting tall in the saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life in wild country. He wore buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, and his hair hung past his shoulders in dark waves that caught the sunlight. Even from a distance, Catherine could see the definition of muscle in his arms and the breadth of his shoulders. The man slowed his horse as he approached, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. His eyes, she noticed as he came within speaking distance, were a startling blue-gray, weathered at the corners from years of squinting into sun and wind. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but it was well kept, not the wild tangle of someone who had completely abandoned civilization. "Looks like you have got yourself some trouble," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel shifting. He dismounted in one smooth motion, landing with surprising lightness for such a large man. Up close, Catherine could see he stood well over 6 feet tall, with arms that strained against the sleeves of his buckskin shirt. "The wheel broke about 20 minutes ago," Catherine replied, trying to keep her voice steady and confident. "I was attempting to see what I could do about it." The man walked over to the damaged wheel, crouching down to examine it with a practiced eye. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. "This is in bad shape," he said after a moment. "The whole spoke assembly is compromised. You would not make it another mile even if you could get it rolling again." "I see," Catherine said, feeling her hopes sink even further. "How far is the nearest town?" "Chloride is about 15 miles southwest," the man said, standing up and brushing dust from his hands. "But I've got tools and materials that will work. I can fix this for you." Catherine felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly made her dizzy. "I would be extremely grateful. I can pay you something, though I do not have much." The man shook his head, already moving toward his pack-horse. "No need for that. Cannot leave a woman stranded out here." "Name is Matthew Johnson, but most folks just call me Matt." "Catherine Morgan," she replied, watching as he began unpacking tools and supplies from his horse with efficient movements. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Truly." "Matt is fine," he said, pulling out a saw, hammer, and various other implements. "I am going to need to take this wheel completely off and rebuild part of it. Will probably take me a couple of hours before sundown. You have water?" "Yes, plenty, and food if you are hungry." He nodded, already focused on the task at hand. Catherine watched him work for a few minutes, fascinated by the competence and sureness of his movements. He positioned a sturdy log under the wagon axle, then used a lever arrangement to lift the broken wheel clear of the ground. His muscles flexed and strained with the effort, the fabric of his shirt pulling tight across his back and shoulders. There was something reassuring about his presence, something solid and dependable that made Catherine feel safer than she had in days. She busied herself setting up a small camp, building a fire and putting coffee on to boil. The afternoon wore on, and Matthew worked steadily, removing the broken spokes, shaping new ones from wood he carried in his pack, and carefully fitting everything back together. Catherine brought him water periodically, and they exchanged occasional words, but mostly he concentrated on the repair while she watched and helped when he needed an extra pair of hands. "You do this often?" she asked at one point, holding a piece of wood steady while he hammered. "Often enough," Matthew replied. "Spent the last 8 years up in the mountains, trapping and hunting, but I grew up on a ranch, learned how to fix just about anything that could break. Out here, you learn to be resourceful or you do not survive long." 8 years in the mountains, Catherine said, trying to imagine such a solitary existence. "That must be a difficult life." Matthew paused in his hammering, considering her words. "Difficult maybe, but honest. The mountains do not lie to you, they do not pretend to be something they are not. I appreciate that." There was something in his tone that suggested a deeper story, but Catherine did not press. Instead, she said, "What brings you down from the mountains now?" "Time for a change," he said simply, returning to his work. "A man cannot stay isolated forever. Eventually, you start to miss things." Conversation. Coffee that is not made in a tin cup over a pine fire. The sound of a woman's voice. The last comment made Catherine's cheeks warm slightly, and she was grateful that he was focused on the wheel and not looking at her face. She went back to the fire, checking on the coffee and the beans she had started cooking. The sun was lower now, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold, and a slight breeze had picked up, offering relief from the oppressive heat. By the time darkness began to fall, Matthew had the wheel reassembled and remounted on the wagon. He tested it carefully, putting weight on it, spinning it to make sure everything moved smoothly. Catherine held a lantern for him, watching his face in the flickering light as he examined his work with a critical eye. "That should hold," he finally declared. "It is not pretty, but it is sound. You should make it to chloride without trouble." "I cannot thank you enough," Catherine said, meaning every word. "You may have saved my life." Matthew wiped his hands on a rag, then looked at her directly for the first time in hours. In the lantern light, his eyes seemed to glow, and Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she could not quite name. "Where are you headed once you reach chloride?" he asked. "My sister has a homestead about 10 miles past the town. Her husband runs cattle. I am going to stay with them for a while, help out where I can." Matthew nodded slowly. "That is rough country between here and there. You should not be traveling it alone." "I do not have much choice," Catherine said quietly. "I am all the family my sister has besides her husband. I promised I would come." For a long moment, Matthew was silent, and Catherine could almost see him working through something in his mind. Finally, he said, "I will travel with you. Make sure you get there safely." Catherine's first instinct was to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she would feel much safer with a capable man beside her. And there was something about Matthew Johnson that made her trust him despite having known him for only a few hours. "I would appreciate that very much," she said, "but I do not want to take you out of your way." "I've got no particular destination in mind," Matthew replied with a slight shrug. "And like I said, I am looking for a change. Maybe that country around Chloride has opportunities for a man with my skills." They shared a simple meal by the fire, sitting on opposite sides with the flames between them. Catherine learned that Matthew was 28 years old, originally from Colorado, where his family had run a horse ranch until disease wiped out most of their stock, and his parents had died within a year of each other. He had drifted into the mountains after that, seeking solitude and a way to make sense of his losses. In turn, she told him about her own losses, about her husband Benjamin, who had been a good man, a schoolteacher, struck down by fever in the prime of his life. "Seems we have both known grief," Matthew said quietly, staring into the fire. "Maybe that is why fate put us on the same road today." "Maybe," Catherine agreed, though she was not sure she believed in fate. Still, there was something comforting about the idea that their meeting was not pure accident, that there might be some purpose to the suffering they had both endured. They took turns keeping watch through the night, though Matthew insisted on taking the longer shifts. Catherine slept in the wagon while he sat by the dying fire, and when she woke briefly in the deep hours before dawn, she could see his silhouette against the stars, solid and vigilant, and she felt a sense of safety she had not experienced since her husband's death. The next morning they broke camp early, eager to cover ground before the heat became unbearable. Matthew rode beside the wagon, his pack horse trailing behind, and they talked as they traveled. He pointed out features of the landscape, showed her where to look for water sources, explained which plants were safe to eat and which would make a person sick. Catherine found herself hanging on his words, fascinated by the depth of his knowledge and the quiet way he shared it. As the day wore on, she began to notice other things about him too. The way he sat his horse with unconscious grace, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for potential dangers, the rare but genuine smiles that would occasionally cross his face when she said something that amused him. There was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with his rough exterior, a kindness in the way he spoke to the horses, in how he helped her down from the wagon when they stopped to water the animals. They reached Chloride by late afternoon, a small mining town clinging to existence in the harsh desert. Matthew helped Catherine resupply at the general store, using his knowledge to make sure she got fair prices and good quality goods. The storekeeper, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked at Matthew with a mixture of respect and wariness that Catherine found telling. This was a man who commanded respect, she realized, even from strangers. "Your homestead is another 10 miles. Matthew asked as they loaded the new supplies onto the wagon. "Yes, to the northeast. My sister wrote that it is in a valley with a spring, good grazing land." Matthew looked toward the northeast, his expression thoughtful. "I know that area. It is decent country if you can defend it." "Your brother-in-law, he has help, ranch hands." "I believe so, though Caroline's letters are not always detailed." "Why do you ask?" "Just thinking," Matthew said, but he did not elaborate. They left Chloride as the sun was beginning to set, planning to camp one more night before reaching the homestead in the morning. Matthew led them to a spot he knew, a protected hollow with a small spring and good grass for the horses. As Catherine prepared dinner, she found herself watching him set up camp with the same efficient competence he brought to everything. He had removed his buckskin shirt in the heat, and she could see the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he worked, the scars that marked a life lived hard and dangerous. "You are staring," Matthew said without turning around, and Catherine felt her face flush with embarrassment. "I apologize," she said quickly. "I was just thinking how different you are from my husband. Benjamin was a gentle man, soft-spoken, more comfortable with books than with physical labor." Matthew turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Different does not mean better or worse. "I am sure he was a good man." "He was," Catherine agreed, "but he was not built for this land. The West killed him as surely as the fever did. He was always talking about going back east to somewhere more civilized." "And you?" Matthew asked. "Do you want to go back east?" Catherine considered the question as she stirred the pot over the fire. "I thought I did, but now I am not so sure. There is something about this place, despite its harshness. It feels like you can breathe here, like you can become whoever you need to be without the weight of expectations and propriety pressing down on you." Matthew nodded slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That is exactly why I came west in the first place. And why I stayed, even when staying meant being alone." They ate as the stars came out, filling the sky with more light than Catherine had ever seen. Matthew told her stories of his years in the mountains, of encounters with bears and mountain lions, of winters so harsh they nearly killed him, of the profound peace that came from watching the sun rise over snow-covered peaks with no other human soul for 50 miles in any direction. "Do you miss it?" Catherine asked. "The solitude?" "Parts of it," Matthew admitted. "But I think I was hiding up there, not living. There is a difference. I was 20 when I went into those mountains, still half a boy, running from pain I did not know how to process. I am coming down a man ready to face whatever comes next." "That is brave," Catherine said softly. Matthew shook his head. "Not brave, just done with hiding." That night, as Catherine lay in her wagon looking up at the canvas cover, she found herself thinking about Matthew in ways that both excited and frightened her. It had only been 6 months since Benjamin's death. Was it wrong to feel this pull toward another man so soon? But Benjamin himself had made her promise in those final fevered days that she would not close herself off from life, that she would find happiness again if the opportunity presented itself. She could hear Matthew moving around outside, banking the fire, settling in for his watch. She climbed out of the wagon quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the desert night's chill. "Cannot sleep?" Matthew asked as she approached the fire. "Too much on my mind," Catherine admitted, sitting down across from him. "May I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "I may not answer, but you can ask." Catherine smiled at his honesty. "When you were in the mountains, were you ever lonely? I mean truly, deeply lonely?" Matthew was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Every day, especially the first few years. I would go weeks without speaking out loud, and when I finally did, my voice would sound strange to my own ears. I would dream about conversations, about sitting across a table from someone and just talking about nothing important, about hearing laughter that was not my own." "Why did you stay then?" "Because the loneliness up there was clean, if that makes sense. It was not complicated. I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Down here with people, loneliness can cut deeper because you can be surrounded by folks and still feel completely alone." Catherine nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I felt that way after Benjamin died. The town was full of people offering condolences, bringing food, telling me how sorry they were. but I have never felt more isolated in my life. No one could reach the place inside me where the grief lived. And now, Matthew asked, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. Now I feel less alone than I have in months, Catherine said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Even though we just met, even though this is probably foolish to say. Matthew held her gaze, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. "It is not foolish," he said quietly. "I feel it too." The next morning they reached her sister's homestead just as the sun was climbing toward its zenith. The valley Matthew had mentioned opened up before them, green against the surrounding desert, with a modest house and barn sitting near a line of cottonwood trees that marked the spring's path. Catherine felt a surge of relief at seeing smoke rising from the chimney, evidence that Caroline was home. But as they drew closer, Catherine noticed things that troubled her. The fence around the main corral was in need of repair, with several posts leaning at dangerous angles. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. And when Caroline emerged from the house, Catherine was shocked by how thin and worn her younger sister looked. "Catherine," Caroline called out, hurrying toward the wagon. She was 20 years old, had married Thomas Murphy 2 years ago and moved west full of optimism and dreams. Now her face was gaunt, her eyes shadowed with worry. The two sisters embraced, and Catherine could feel how much weight Caroline had lost. "Where is Thomas?" Catherine asked, looking around for her brother-in-law. Caroline's expression darkened. "In town. He has been spending more time there than here lately. The ranch is not doing well, Catherine. The drought has been hard and we lost cattle to raiders last month. Thomas is trying to arrange loans, but—" She trailed off, noticing Matthew for the first time. "Who is this?" "Matthew Johnson," Catherine said quickly. "He helped me when my wagon broke down, and he escorted me here to make sure I arrived safely. Matt, this is my sister Caroline." Matthew tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, I can see you have been having some difficulties. If you would like, I could help with some of those repairs before I move on." Caroline looked like she might cry from sheer gratitude. "We cannot pay you much." "I am not asking for pay," Matthew said gently. "Just pointing out that I am here and I can help." Over the next several days, Matthew threw himself into repairing the homestead. He fixed the corral fence, rehung the barn door, patched holes in the roof, and accomplished a dozen other tasks that had been beyond Caroline's ability, and that Thomas had been too preoccupied or absent to address. Catherine worked alongside him, handing him tools, holding boards steady, learning as she went. Thomas Murphy returned after 3 days, and Catherine understood immediately why her sister looked so worn. He was a man in his late 20s who had clearly been handsome once, but drink and disappointment had carved hard lines into his face. He regarded Matthew with suspicion at first, but when he saw how much work had been accomplished, his attitude shifted to grudging appreciation. "I suppose I should thank you," Thomas said to Matthew on the evening of his return. "The place looks better than it has in months." "Just helping out," Matthew replied evenly. Catherine noticed he did not offer to shake Thomas's hand, and she wondered what he saw in the younger man that made him hold back. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Caroline pulled Catherine aside. "He is drinking more," she whispered, "and he has debts I did not know about. We might lose everything, Catherine. I am frightened." Catherine held her sister as she wept, feeling helpless rage at Thomas for putting Caroline in this position. When Matthew found her later, sitting on the porch in the darkness, he did not ask what was wrong. He simply sat beside her, his presence a comfort. "I am going to stay," Catherine said after a long silence. "Caroline needs me. I cannot abandon her here." "That is good," Matthew said. "She needs family right now." "What about you?" Catherine asked, turning to look at him. "You have done so much already. I would understand if you wanted to move on." Matthew was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and serious. "I have been thinking about that. This valley has good water, good grass when the rains come. There is potential here. And your brother-in-law, he does not have the knowledge or the temperament to make it work, but someone else might." "What are you saying?" "I am saying I could stay too, help build this place up. I've got savings from my trapping years, enough to invest in stock and improvements. I could talk to Thomas about a partnership or about buying some land adjacent to his." Catherine's heart was beating faster. "You would do that?" Matthew turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight his expression was open and honest in a way she had never seen before. "I would do that for a lot of reasons, Catherine. Because I think this place could prosper with the right work. Because your sister needs help, and you are determined to give it to her. But mostly, I would do it because in the few days I have known you, I have felt more alive, more hopeful about the future than I have in 8 years. I do not want to walk away from that. I do not want to walk away from you." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "Matt, I have only been a widow for 6 months. People would talk." "Let them talk," Matthew said softly. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am just asking for a chance, for time to see where this could go. I will work here, help build something good, and we can see what develops between us naturally." "And if nothing develops?" Catherine asked, though she already knew that was not a real possibility. Matthew smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. "Then I will have a good ranch and some friends, and that is more than I had a week ago. But Catherine, I think we both know something is already developing." She could not argue with that. Every day working beside him had deepened her feelings, had shown her new facets of his character. His patience, his kindness, his unshakable strength. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with a mixture of tenderness and longing that made her breath catch. "I would like that," Catherine said finally. "I would like to see where this goes." Matthew reached out and took her hand, his palm rough and warm against hers. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together under the vast Arizona sky. The next morning, Matthew approached Thomas about his proposition. Catherine was not present for the conversation, but she could hear raised voices from inside the house. When Matthew emerged an hour later, his expression was carefully neutral. "Well?" Catherine asked anxiously. He agreed, though it took some convincing. "I am buying the northern section of his land, about 300 acres, for a fair price. It will give him the capital he needs to pay off his debts and restock his herd. In exchange, I get good land with water access, and we will work together on projects that benefit both properties." "How did you convince him?" Matthew's expression darkened slightly. "I pointed out that his alternatives were limited. The bank was about to foreclose. This way he keeps his home and a working ranch, and he has a neighbor who can help him succeed instead of watching him fail." Over the following weeks, Matthew made the property his own. He built a small but solid cabin on his land, working from dawn until dusk with a determination that Catherine found both admirable and slightly concerning. She would bring him lunch and find him shirtless in the heat, his bronzed skin slick with sweat, muscles working as he lifted logs and hammered nails. He was building not just a home but a future, and she was increasingly certain she wanted to be part of it. Thomas kept his end of the bargain, though Catherine could see it grated on him to have Matthew nearby, a constant reminder of his own failures. But he purchased new cattle with the money from the land sale, and with Matthew's help, the 2 ranches began to show signs of real prosperity. The drought broke in late September, bringing rains that turned the valley green and filled the spring to overflowing. Catherine divided her time between Caroline's house and helping Matthew with his place. It was during these hours, working side by side, that their relationship deepened. Matthew told her more about his past, about the pain of losing his parents and the guilt he felt for abandoning the family ranch. Catherine shared her own story more fully, the loneliness of her marriage to a man she had loved but never truly understood, the relief mixed with grief when Benjamin had finally passed. "Does that make me terrible?" she asked one afternoon as they took a break from building a chicken coop. "That part of me was relieved when he died." Matthew shook his head firmly. "It makes you human. You watched someone you cared about suffer. Relief that his suffering ended does not mean you did not love him. It means you have compassion." His understanding, his refusal to judge her, made Catherine fall even deeper in love with him. Because that was what this was, she had finally admitted to herself. Love. Different from what she had felt for Benjamin, but no less real. This was a love built on mutual respect, on shared work and shared dreams, on the thrill she felt every time Matthew smiled at her or touched her hand. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch of his newly completed cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Matthew said, "I want to court you properly, Catherine. I know we have been spending time together, but I want to make my intentions clear and honorable." Catherine's heart swelled. "I would like that very much. Your mourning period will be up in December. Would it be appropriate for me to call on you formally then, to take you to church socials in town, to make it known that we are stepping out together?" "Yes," Catherine said, reaching for his hand. "Though I think anyone with eyes already knows how we feel about each other." Matthew laced his fingers through hers. "Maybe so, but I want to do this right. You deserve that. You deserve everything." True to his word, Matthew courted Catherine with old-fashioned formality once December arrived. He would arrive at Caroline's house dressed in his best clothes, hat in hand, and ask permission to take Catherine to town for church services or community gatherings. The townspeople of Chloride watched their courtship with interest, and while there was some gossip about the timing, most folks seemed to approve of the match. Matthew was well respected for his hard work and fair dealing, and Catherine's devotion to her sister had earned her admiration. Christmas of 1879 arrived with a rare dusting of snow on the mountains. Matthew invited both families to his cabin for dinner, and Caroline and Thomas accepted. It was the first time Catherine had seen Thomas truly relaxed in months, the ranch's improved fortunes having lifted some of the weight from his shoulders. He was drinking less, working more, and Caroline looked healthier and happier than she had since Catherine's arrival. After dinner, Matthew pulled Catherine aside. They stood in the doorway of his cabin, looking out at the valley dusted with snow, and he said, "I have something for you." From his pocket, he pulled a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a small sapphire set in the center. "Matt," she breathed. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "One of the few things I kept from the old ranch. Catherine Morgan, I love you. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you standing by that broken wagon, determined to fix it yourself even though you did not have the right tools. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Catherine's face, but she was smiling wider than she had in years. "Yes, yes, Matthew, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her for the first time. A kiss full of promise and passion, and the joy of two people who had found each other against all odds. Inside the cabin, Caroline squealed with delight, having clearly been watching, and Thomas offered his congratulations with genuine warmth. They were married in February of 1880 in the small church in Chloride. Caroline stood up as Catherine's witness, and a rancher named Samuel Jenkins, who had become Matthew's friend, served as his. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that complimented her eyes, and Matthew wore a new suit that made him look almost civilized, though Catherine privately preferred him in his work clothes with his sleeves rolled up. The wedding night was spent in Matthew's cabin, which was now their cabin. Catherine had worried that she might feel guilty, comparing Matthew to Benjamin, but when Matthew took her in his arms with such tenderness and passion, there was no room in her heart for anything but love for this man who had changed her life so completely. Their first year of marriage was hard work but filled with happiness. Matthew and Catherine worked the ranch together, building up their herd, improving the land, creating something lasting and good. Next door, Thomas and Caroline's place also prospered, the two ranches cooperating on roundups and fence building and all the countless tasks that ranching demanded. In November of 1880, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. Matthew's joy was unbounded, though he immediately became even more protective than usual, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard. Catherine bore his hovering with patient amusement, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in July of 1881, a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Michael Benjamin Johnson, honoring both Matthew's father and Catherine's first husband. Matthew held his son with a gentleness that seemed impossible in such large, work-roughened hands, and Catherine fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him cradle their child. Caroline gave birth to her own daughter just 2 months later, a little girl named Emma. The two children would grow up together, more like siblings than cousins, playing in the valley while their parents worked the land. As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. Matthew proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, developing a small herd known throughout the territory for quality. Catherine managed the financial side of things, her education and natural aptitude for numbers proving invaluable. Together, they became one of the most successful ranching families in that part of Arizona. They had 2 more children over the next 6 years. A daughter they named Margaret arrived in 1883 with her father's blonde hair and stubborn determination. Another son, called Jacob, came in 1886, completing their family. The cabin that Matthew had built was expanded into a proper ranch house, with enough rooms for everyone and a wide porch where the family would gather in the evenings. Thomas Murphy eventually stopped drinking entirely and became a devoted father to his growing family. He and Caroline had 3 more children after Emma, and the 2 ranches effectively operated as one large family enterprise. Thomas never quite achieved Matthew's level of success, but he carved out a decent living and regained his self-respect, which was perhaps more important. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew took Catherine up into the foothills where they could look down on the valley they had built together. Their cattle dotted the grasslands, their children were playing near the house under Caroline's watchful eye, and the future stretched before them full of promise. "You ever regret it?" Matthew asked, his arm around Catherine's waist. "Giving up the possibility of a more civilized life back east?" Catherine leaned into his strength, marveling as always at how safe and cherished he made her feel. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am meant to be." "I think about that day I found you with your broken wagon," Matthew said softly. "How close I came to riding right past." "I almost did, you know. I was in a hurry to reach Prescott, thought I might find work there, but something made me stop." "I am glad you did," Catherine said, turning to kiss him, Even after 10 years, his kisses still made her heart race. You saved me that day in more ways than one. We saved each other, Matthew corrected gently. I was lost until I met you, Catherine. You gave me a reason to come down from those mountains, a reason to build instead of hide. They stood together watching the sunset. Two people who had found each other in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory and built a love that would last all their days. Below them, their children's laughter floated up on the evening breeze, the sound of the future they had created together. Michael, their eldest, was already showing signs of his father's strength and his mother's intelligence. At 10 years old, he was reading advanced books and could ride better than boys twice his age. Margaret, at 7, was fearless and kind, always bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Young Jacob, just 4, followed his father everywhere, trying to walk like him, talk like him, be like him in every way. As the years continued to pass, the Johnson Ranch became a landmark in the region. Matthew's reputation for integrity and skill spread, and he was often asked to help settle disputes or advise other ranchers. Catherine became known for her generous spirit, always ready to help a neighbor in need. And for the school, she started in their home for the valley's children when no teacher could be found to come to such a remote area. In 1895, when they had been married for 15 years, the territorial governor himself visited their ranch, interested in Matthew's cattle breeding program. It was a proud moment for both of them, seeing how far they had come from that day on a dusty road when a mountain man had stopped to help a woman with a broken wagon. Their children grew into capable adults. Michael studied veterinary medicine and returned to expand the ranch's operations. Margaret married a young lawyer from Prescott and became a fierce advocate for women's rights, much to her father's pride and occasional consternation. Jacob followed his father's footsteps completely, becoming a rancher and eventually taking over the day-to-day operations of the Johnson spread. Thomas Murphy passed away in 1898 from pneumonia, and Caroline came to live with Matthew and Catherine. The three of them spent many evenings on the porch, reminiscing about the early days, about how hard they had worked and how much they had accomplished. Caroline never remarried, content to help raise her grandchildren and tend the garden that had become her passion. Matthew and Catherine grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. On quiet mornings, Catherine would watch Matthew move around their bedroom, his hair now silver but his body still strong despite his years, and she would marvel at the life they had built. He still made her feel cherished and desired, still looked at her with the same intensity he had shown that first night by the fire when he had admitted he felt what she felt. In the spring of 1920, on a warm afternoon with the valley in full bloom, Matthew and Catherine sat together on their porch. They were both in their 60s now, grandparents many times over, respected elders of their community. Matthew's hand still found Catherine's as naturally as breathing, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 40 years of practice. "I have been thinking," Matthew said, his voice still deep though roughened further by age, "about that broken wagon wheel." Catherine laughed, the sound still bright despite the years. "After all this time you are still thinking about that wheel." "I am thinking about how the best things in life come from unexpected places. I was just a lonely mountain man trying to figure out where I belonged. You were a widow trying to make a new start, and a broken wheel brought us together." "More than the wheel," Catherine said softly. "You could have fixed it and ridden away, but you chose to follow me home. You chose to stay." "Best decision I ever made," Matthew said firmly. "Every day with you has been a gift, Catherine, every single day." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor through 4 decades. I love you, Matthew Johnson. I loved you that first week, and I love you even more now. And I love you, he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Always have, always will. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold, the same mountains that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The ranch spread out before them was testament to their love and labor, filled with children and grandchildren, with life and laughter and all the messy, beautiful chaos of a family built on devotion and hard work. Michael came out of the barn, leading a horse, and waved to his parents. His own children were playing near the corral, and his wife was hanging laundry with the help of Margaret, who was visiting with her family. Jacob was out riding the fence line, continuing the work his father had started so many years ago. The next generation was already learning the lessons of the land, the values of integrity and perseverance that Matthew and Catherine had modeled. That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner at the ranch house, a tradition they maintained every Sunday. The table was crowded with children, grandchildren, Caroline, and various friends who had become family over the years. Matthew said grace, thanking God for the food, for the family, and for the unexpected blessings that came from helping a stranger on a lonely road. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children were playing outside in the twilight, Matthew asked Catherine to dance. There was no music, just the sound of the wind in the cottonwoods and the distant lowing of cattle, but they moved together in the parlor with the ease of partners who knew each other's rhythms perfectly. "You remember our wedding dance?" Catherine asked, her head resting against Matthew's chest as they swayed. "I remember being terrified I would step on your feet," Matthew admitted with a chuckle. "I had not danced in years." "You did step on my feet," Catherine said, laughing, "but I did not care. I was too happy to care about anything except that I was finally your wife. And I was finally home," Matthew added quietly. "After all those years of wandering, I was finally home." The years continued their steady march. In 1925, Matthew and Catherine celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary with a party that brought people from all over the territory. Former neighbors, old friends, business associates, and family members filled the ranch, testament to the lives they had touched and the community they had helped build. Matthew gave a speech that evening, standing on the porch with Catherine at his side. 45 years ago, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, I was a man who had given up on ever finding happiness. I had convinced myself that solitude was enough, that I did not need human connection or love. Then, I found a woman trying to fix a broken wagon wheel, and everything changed. Catherine showed me that strength comes in many forms, that courage is not about being unafraid but about facing your fears anyway. She showed me that love is worth the risk, worth the vulnerability. And she has spent 45 years proving that I was right to take a chance on us. Thank you, Catherine, for every day, every moment, every memory we have made together. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Catherine kissed her husband, surrounded by the family and community they had built together from nothing but determination and love. They continued ranching well into their 70s, though they gradually handed more responsibility to their children. Matthew would still ride out to check on the herd, though Catherine insisted he not go alone anymore. She would accompany him, the two of them moving slowly across land they knew as well as they knew each other. On one such ride in the summer of 1928, they stopped at the spot where Matthew had first proposed, where they had stood looking down at the valley they were building together. Now that valley held 3 generations of their family, hundreds of cattle, fields of crops, and a legacy of hard work and integrity. "We did good, did we not?" Matthew asked, his arm around Catherine's waist as it had been so many times before. "We did better than good," Catherine replied. "We built something that will last beyond us. Our children will carry on what we started and their children after them." "I wish I could see it," Matthew said wistfully. "See what becomes of this place in 50 years, 100. "It will be good," Catherine said with certainty. "Because we built it on the right foundation. Love, respect, hard work, and community. Those things do not change." Matthew pulled her closer, and they stood together as the sun set on another day in their extraordinary, ordinary life. The love between them was as strong as ever, tempered by time and hardship into something unbreakable. In the fall of 1930, Matthew's health began to fail. His heart, the doctor said, worn out from years of hard work and hard living. Catherine refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair next to their bed, making sure he took his medicine, reading to him from the books he loved. "I am not ready," Matthew said one night when the pain was particularly bad. "I am not ready to leave you." "Then do not," Catherine said fiercely, gripping his hand. "Fight, Matthew. You are the strongest man I know. Fight." And he did fight for her, for their family, for the life they had built together. The winter was hard, but Matthew survived it, and by spring he was able to sit on the porch again, to enjoy the sunshine and the sight of his grandchildren playing. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in February of 1930, a quieter affair than the 45th had been, but no less meaningful. Their children arranged everything, and Matthew and Catherine spent the day surrounded by love, recounting stories of their life together. 50 years, Matthew marveled that evening as they prepared for bed. "Half a century with the same woman, and I am still not tired of her." "I should hope not," Catherine said with mock severity, though her eyes sparkled with humor. "You are stuck with me for at least another 50. Promise." Matthew asked, pulling her into his arms. "Promise," Catherine whispered against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. They lived several more years together, each day a precious gift. Matthew's health continued to decline slowly, but he never lost his sharp mind or his sense of humor. Catherine remained his devoted companion, his nurse, his wife, his best friend. In the spring of 1934, at the age of 82, Matthew Johnson passed away peacefully in his sleep with Catherine holding his hand. His last words, spoken just hours before, had been "I love you" to his wife of 54 years. Catherine mourned deeply, but not bitterly. She had been blessed with more than 5 decades with a man who had loved her completely, who had chosen her every single day. She lived another 8 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandfather, of the mountain man who had saved a woman with a broken wagon and found the love of his life. When Catherine passed away in 1942 at the age of 85, she was buried next to Matthew on a hill overlooking the valley they had built together. Their headstone read simply, "Matthew and Catherine Johnson, built a life, built a love, built a legacy." Their descendants continued the ranch for generations, each one knowing the story of how it all began. How a mountain man with a lonely heart found a widow with a broken wagon wheel on a dusty Arizona road in 1879, and how that chance meeting became the foundation for something beautiful and lasting. The cabin Matthew had built, expanded over the years into a ranch house, remained standing well into the 21st century, a museum maintained by the Johnson family to honor the couple who had started it all. Visitors would walk through the rooms, see the tools Matthew had used, the books Catherine had taught from, the photographs of a large, happy family, and understand that love, real love, was not about grand gestures or fairy tale romance. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, choosing each other again and again, building something that would outlast both of you. And on quiet evenings, when the Arizona wind blew through the valley, people swore they could sometimes hear laughter floating on the breeze, the sound of two souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other through everything life could throw at them. The mountain man and the widow, together forever in the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. Their story became legend in that part of Arizona, told and retold by ranchers and townspeople, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places. That a broken wagon wheel can lead to unbreakable love. That a moment of kindness from a stranger can change everything. Matthew and Catherine Johnson had built more than a ranch. They had built a testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together, when they loved without reservation, when they committed to building a future together no matter what obstacles stood in their way. The valley they had loved still blooms green every spring. The mountains they had watched together still paint the sky purple at sunset. And the legacy they created still lives on in the hearts and lives of their descendants. A reminder that true love, true partnership, true devotion never really dies. It lives on in the land, in the stories, in the example left for those who come after. And somewhere, perhaps, Matthew and Catherine are still together, still watching over the valley they made their own, still holding hands as they have always held hands. Two souls who found each other when they most needed finding and never let go.